Hello again, and welcome to day 3 of week 6 of year 2 of the Religious Education Initiative. We're continuing our way through the Gospel of Mark. Last week we saw Jesus begin to preach, to heal, and to cast out demons, beginning in the city of Capernaum from the house of Simon and Andrew. Now, after healing many people, he went out into the wilderness to pray, and Simon and Andrew, James and John found him there. They wanted him to go back to the city because everyone was looking for him. But he told them he was instead going to go out to the neighboring towns. He was coming to save more than just the city of Capernaum. So let's see what happens. We're starting in chapter 1, verse 40. A leper came to him begging him, and kneeling he said to him, "If you choose, you can make me clean." Moved with pity, Jesus stretched out his hand and touched him and said to him, "I do choose. Be made clean." Immediately the leprosy left him, and he was made clean. After sternly warning him, he sent him away at once, saying to him, "See that you say nothing to anyone, but go, show yourself to the priest, and offer for your cleansing what Moses commanded, as a testimony to them." But he went out and began to proclaim it freely and to spread the word, so that Jesus could no longer go into a town openly, but stayed out in the country, and people came to him from every quarter. When he returned to Capernaum after some days, it was reported that he was at home. So many gathered around that there was no longer room for them, not even in front of the door, and he was speaking the word to them. Then some people came, bringing to him a paralyzed man, carried by 4 of them. And when they could not bring him to Jesus because of the crowd, they removed the roof above him, and after having dug through it, they let down the mat on which the paralytic lay. When Jesus saw their faith, he said to the paralytic, "Son, your sins are forgiven." Now some of the scribes were sitting there, questioning in their hearts, "Why does this fellow speak in this way? It is blasphemy. Who can forgive sins but God alone?" At once Jesus perceived in his spirit that they were discussing these questions among themselves, and he said to them, "Why do you raise such questions in your hearts? Which is easier, to say to the paralytic, 'Your sins are forgiven,' or to say, 'Stand up and take your mat and walk'? But, so that you may know that the Son of Man has authority on earth to forgive sins." Then he said to the paralytic, "I say to you, stand up, take your mat, and go to your home." And he stood up and immediately took the mat and went out before all of them, so that they were all amazed and glorified God, saying, "We have never seen anything like this." So, there are a few points we can make from this. The first is that St. Mark is telling this story in a way to make very clear to us who Jesus is. He's not coming out and telling us, "Jesus is God, Jesus is God, Jesus is God." But in fact, every story he tells us is making that point clearly, because Jesus does things that no one else would do. With the leprosy, some of the fathers make this point, but it's worth emphasizing. The one thing that nobody would do with a leper was touch them. And most of the time, Jesus doesn't actually touch the people that he heals. He just speaks a word. That is how Mark often shows his authority. He doesn't have to argue. He doesn't have to say a prayer. He doesn't have to, wiggle his hands weirdly. This isn't magic, and this isn't medicine. This is just Jesus showing the power of God that only God has over sickness and demons and even death. But with leprosy, for Jesus to speak without touching him would show that he was scared of the leprosy, which was the normal way for people to be. So in not just saying, "I choose, be clean," and reaching out and touching him, even there he shows his absolute power. Because leprosy was understood to be highly contagious. Whether it actually was or not isn't clear, but Jesus is showing his authority. And he does the same thing in the second story with the paralyzed man who comes through the roof. Because first he tells him, your sins are forgiven. And everyone's like whispering and muttering, he doesn't have authority to forgive sins. No one has authority to forgive sins except only God. And then Jesus says to them, well, what's easier? Is it easier for me to say your sins are forgiven? Because, there's no proof required of that. You can get mad at me and so forth. But if I say, get up, Mr. Paralyzed Man, who has no strength and the nerves don't even work and make the connection, but stand up, pick up your bed, and go home. If I say that, then that's easy to prove wrong, because if he doesn't get up, he doesn't get up. So it's much harder to say that, but so that you know that the Son of Man has authority to forgive sins, then he tells him, pick up your bed, stand up, go home. And the man does. So St. Mark is looking very clearly to show us Jesus' authority in two stories in which Jesus is very clearly showing his authority, that he's not afraid of human sickness. He is a master of it. And with this very embarrassing object lesson for the scribes, for the religious leaders here, in both forgiving the sins and having the man stand up. There's another point that we can make here. The story of the paralyzed man being let down through the roof actually shows us the importance of prayer for one another. Because if we pay attention, we see the paralyzed man doesn't actually do anything himself. Doesn't say that he says anything either. It's his friends. His friends bring him to Jesus, and when they can't get through the crowd, they climb up on the roof and they let their friend down. Now, we would think this is a crazy thing to do with a paralyzed man. You're going to take the stretcher, pull it up onto the roof. He could fall out. He could die. Why are they doing? But they pull him up. They open up the roof, which is maybe thatch or tiles. It's not clear, but they're able to open it up. It says they dug through it. So, and then they let their friend down. Jesus sees this, and what he understands from this is that these friends of the paralyzed man, they love him, and they trust Jesus to take care of him. So he, as it appears, he is responding to their faith, their trust, their obedience, their commitment to him, their prayer on behalf of their friend. He responds to that in forgiving his sins and then healing him. The paralyzed man, we assume, is open to this. He is willing to receive the gift. But the friends are agents, they're actors in this. Their prayer, their trust matters. And so too does ours. So it's not a small thing if we see a loved one or even an enemy struggling and in trouble and in anguish. It is not a small thing for us to pray for them. In this way, we entrust them to the Lord. And we see from his response to the paralyzed man that God does not count that as nothing. He accepts that, maybe as much, but certainly he accepts it to some degree, maybe as much as the person themselves, their faith. But again, prayer matters. Prayer works. It was the prayers of his friends that resulted in this paralyzed man being healed. So those are some thoughts. I'm sure there's a lot more to see in here. We could connect it to the Ark of Noah too. It's not any trick that Jesus does. It is just the people who are connected to him, who entrust themselves to him. They're the ones who are saved. This is the same lesson ultimately of the Ark and the same point that St. Augustine was making. But, you all can draw those connections yourselves. So, God bless you. Have a wonderful day. We'll see you next week.